My name is Maria Weiner, and I'm the president of Florida Caregivers Network. So I am so ready to start this day. I've been ready for the past 7 months.
So have we.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second annual Caregiver Conference, Getting Real About Reality. Today will be a special day for all the caregivers in this room and professionals that care or know someone that lives with dementia. I hope that by the end of this day, you guys are re-energized with all this information we're going to give you, have the tools, have all the resources for you to take care of your loved one. So we're going to start and we're going to get real about reality. This is getting real by the minute, isn't it? Heidi Crockett. Heidi's well loved here. That's wonderful. Is a national speaker, author, and education and outreach coordinator for aging care advocates. She frequently presents on stress reduction, brain health, and intimacy. She is a licensed clinical social worker with postgraduate training from the University of Michigan. She is one of 5 certified sexuality educators in Florida, 1 out of 5. Her first book, written in memory of her husband, is titled Caregiver Stress, Neurobiology to the Rescue. Please welcome Heidi Crockett.
So, it's been a long day, so I can't believe we're going to stand up a little bit. You guys do me a favor and stand up, please. So I have a little video. So I know the title of my presentation is Emotional Distress, but I think we're going to have a little happiness before we go into distress. So can you play that video that I had upload?
More than 5 million Americans.
No, that's not the right video. Looks good, though.
More than 5.
Yeah, this is it. Okay, so we're going to make different things happy. So now we're going to make our right hand happy. And we're going to make our right elbow happy. Now we're going to make our right shoulder happy. Now you're going to make your left hand happy. Now you're going to make your left elbow happy. If you do circles, it puts more synovial fluid in the joint. Circles, it's good for the joint. Happy left shoulder. Okay, now we're going to do a happy chest. Now you're going to do a happy belly button. Happy belly button. You're going to do a happy lower back. Now you're going to make a happy right leg. Happy right leg. Happy left leg. Happy everything! Okay, now we're going to do a little emotional happiness. So go around and shake hands with people. Happy. Shake hands. Happy. 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 I like this cat in the water. Look at this cat. Okay, we're good. You can sit down. I won't make you stand up anymore. Thank you. You can turn it off. Happy. I'm going to happily set my timer so I don't go over time. We did start late though, so I've got 20 minutes. Okay. So how do the clicker. Good, so my name is Heidi, and I am ASECT certified as a sexuality educator. That stands for the American Association for Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. I'm always telling people what ASECT is. It's not insect, ASECT. But how does that apply to caregivers and Alzheimer's? It applies a lot. Basically, my passion is love, and I think people deserve love throughout the lifespan. And so when we're talking about sexual health or intimacy, I'm applying it specifically here to dementia and caregiving. So the talk today is how you can be loving, how you can continue to be loving with the person you care for and with yourself. And I always like talking after Eileen speaks, because everything she says is in my PowerPoints. She's very evidence-based in her data, and she said things that really articulate the concepts I want to say today. So these are some of the things that she said. She said, think about, as I say these things, think about how the caregiver feels when they hear these things, okay? You are making them angry. This is the person with dementia. You are making them angry by trying to jog their memory. You have to think quick. You need to be very aware. You need to be very careful about medication, right? And then also the behaviors that are going on that she described, the short-term memory loss, the sequencing. Let's see someone starts screaming like she described and throwing fits, right, because they needed a root canal. Let's say you're the caregiver and someone starts doing that in front of you, the screaming and throwing a fit. How do you feel as a caregiver? Scared. Helpless. Irritated? Yeah, if someone starts screaming in front of you, right? So I like to talk about brain health, but I don't want to get too overwhelming with all the neuroscience terms. But things happen to the brain of the caregiver, and that's what I speak about. Oftentimes, others will speak about what happens to the brain of the person with dementia. But you need a good brain too, which I like many people here have been saying that. So what happens over time is that it's not someone screaming in front of you the first time that's so bad. It's probably about the 88th time it happens, right? And what happens is that has a cumulative effect on the caregiver. And these are things that are oftentimes not spoken about so much. You know, sometimes they might say, oh, there's caregiver burden, or they have these terms, caregiver burnout. But we know, because of mirror neurons, that when you observe something happening to another person, that it actually affects you. So let's say you're watching someone and they have a seizure. They might not remember the fact that they had a seizure, but you'll remember. And it physically affects your body. It is a form of stress. So these are the types of things I want to talk about. How can you be loving to yourself? So when I talk about brain health, like mirror neurons, the main reason I'm mentioning to them as the caregiver, to the caregiver specifically in this room, is so that you can remember, oh gee, it's not just that it's important to engage in some self-care. Actually, I think that caregivers need to do extra self-care, more self-care than the average person, because of the cumulative effects of stress and that 88th time the person screams at you. What I found as a caregiver when I was caregiving my husband had a brain tumor is that I found that there came a time when getting that massage once a month, it wasn't another massage that was going to help me. So I know there's someone in the room here who's somewhere in that space. And so I felt like when Eileen was talking that there were kind of two places that a caregiver goes. One is the place of solutions, and the other is the place where there are not so many solutions. And I think it's important to pay attention as a caregiver, where are you? And solutions are things like your loved one, they're having behaviors. Listen, I can learn more about the disease. I can adjust my behaviors to make my loved one happier. Those are solutions. I can fix my environment. That's all excellent. I'm so happy you're here saying that. It's going to make you a very good caregiver. It's going to make your loved one very happy. Then there's this other side here where there aren't solutions. And as a caregiver, I think it's important to remember that there is a part of caregiving where there are not solutions, okay? And this is like the pink elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, okay? What is the person with dementia right now? What do we know, right? It's a terminal disease. I know when I spoke this morning, we're getting a lot of advances in technology and medicine. I'm hoping that in the future, but for now we know that when you have a diagnosis, it's a terminal condition. What other things are there not solutions for? You can medicate certain behaviors, but that person, their brain functioning, their brain is shrinking through the disease process, and their brain functioning, as far as we're aware, it will not return. And what that means is there's a grieving process. There's a grieving process for that person who's going through the dying process, but there's a grieving process for the caregiver. It's called anticipatory grief. And really, to wrap your arms around caregiving is to really understand your relationship with anticipatory grief. Because what happens is with the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of the brain here that thinks about thinking, that's the part of you that can anticipate the future. And your loved one with dementia, they start to lose functioning in the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is amazing. There's 9 functions: intuition, morality, higher reasoning, complex thought, thinking about thinking. This is all the prefrontal cortex. What we know about the person with dementia is that they tend to be more in the limbic brain the more the disease process continues. So the limbic brain is like the seat of emotions and memories. So I always tell people, every four times in 1 second, 4 times, the limbic brain is doing this. Am I safe? Do people want me? 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 That's what the limbic brain does. And it's where the fight, flight, freeze mode comes out. So that's the place that the person with dementia is coming from more often than not. And as the caregiver, because of the mirror neurons, you're going to be going into your limbic brain too, because you're merging with that person. I call it caregiver muddy brain, right? And all that means is, as a caregiver, what you're going to want to do is, this is like my talk summed up in a minute or two, what you're going to want to do is, you're going to want to find ways to connect with other people, with those mirror neurons, with people who are able to do higher functionings of the prefrontal cortex, like attuned communication, right, where you're really connecting with someone, you're feeling something, and there's intellectual stimulation. Sometimes as the disease progresses, you're not going to be able to get all those intimacy needs met from your partner. And so as a caregiver, what I'm recommending is that you find ways to get those needs met. And I'm sure people in this room already are engaging in those activities, like support groups, or talking one-on-one with a therapist, or having time with their friends and respite care. But what I try and do is I try and bring the science into this so you can understand why it's so important. People are telling you to do these things, but let's talk about the science. So this is an outline of my talk. Basically, I'm going to talk about how stress affects intimacy, what happens in the brain in intimacy, why emotional intimacy is really important, and what practical steps can be done. And I have like 10 minutes to do all that. So the main thing I wanted to ask everyone in the audience is, can you define good emotional health in one word? And here's a picture to give a clue. Happy. That's a good one. Love, comfort, sharing, trust, support, caring, joy, being content. So those are emotions. So the word I chose was connection. Okay? Connection. And what that means from a brain science perspective is attuned communication. Attuned communication. And the other word is resonance, and another word is called entrainment. But they're all brain science terms which mean the same thing. It means that we're connecting in a meaningful way, and there's a feeling there. As we look at each other in the eyes, there's a feeling. So I love this quote from Dr. Gilbert. I'm going to read it. It would be difficult to overestimate the importance of human relationships. If love does not make the world go around, then surely relationships do. In the world of the personal, the world of work, and the world at large, relationships between people are a critical and decisive force. So the benefits of intimacy. We know that recipients of affectionate communication, they are at less risk of physical illness. That means you're less likely to get sick if you receive this, what I'm talking about. We'll call it attuned communication. And you have a greater ability to heal. In other words, you heal quicker. So this is a type of food that people oftentimes don't talk about, and because it's not seen or spoken about, people don't tend to prioritize it as much. So these are some interesting facts. I remember when I first read this, I was like, wow, this is so cool. When intimacy happens, hearts begin to entrain. Does anyone know what that word means?
Align up.
Yeah, they begin, someone said align up. They begin to beat in rhythm. And then what happens is the hormone, the immune, and the respiratory systems all start to align. Right, so there are countless physiological benefits from having intimacy. I think oftentimes we don't even know all the benefits. I talk about, I'm going to come back to that slide. These are other positive things that happen with intimacy. You're at less risk for depression, alcohol abuse. You're less likely to be in domestic violence relationships. You have an advanced ability to heal, and you're less angry, you're less anxious, you're less depressed, you have fewer negative emotions, you have more positive states of mind. And there's two main ingredients when you have intimacy. One is dopamine, and the other is oxytocin. So dopamine is a hormone and neurotransmitter that's essential to normal functioning of the nervous system. And the reason why that's so important is that your nervous system is getting freaked out from all this 88 screaming episodes, which happens. So anything that you can do to regulate your nervous system is a good thing. And so dopamine, it helps to regulate emotions. And what happens, okay, so when you all, as long as you don't dislike that happy song I played, well, I'm assuming that you liked that song. When you all heard that song and were smiling and dancing, you were releasing dopamine. Okay, so that's dopamine is released naturally throughout the day when you give hugs or when you look at a picture of your granddaughter or things like that. Dopamine is released. So what we want to do is we want to cultivate moments when the dopamine is released. We want to cultivate it with your loved one, and you want to cultivate it in alone time as well. And then the other is oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone secreted during physical intimacy, but it also plays a crucial role in physical health and attachment, which that attuned communication, it has to do with attachment, and that attachment is so important. And Eileen was mentioning that. She said when you're in the car, remember when she said when she's in the car with a loved one and she said, I'll be back. She didn't say in 10 minutes. She basically said, don't worry, I will be back. That has to do with the attachment. Is so important. That's why you emphasize that, because when your loved one with dementia is more in their limbic brain, they have more panic, more fear, that a capacity to have attuned communication and good attachment with the other person, it decreases. That's why you notice that the person with dementia starts to get more needy, because their capacity to recognize emotional attachment is decreased. So that's why you say reassuring things to make up for their brain's lack of capacity to acknowledge that good attachment. So it's important to say those things to your loved ones so they can remember to attach securely. But it's also important for you to get physical distance and also attach securely in meaningful ways to other people who can help anchor you if you're in the whirlwind of caregiving. And in my book, Caregiver Stress, I started out saying that caregiving is like falling from the sky at 120 miles an hour without a parachute. And I really mean that. And because what happens is you're like, oh, and that's what's firing. The limbic brain is like, oh. And what happens when your limbic brain is like that is cortisol is secreted. Does anyone here know what cortisol is? Yes, it's a stress hormone. And I think this is why 63% of the time the caregiver passes away before the person with dementia is that cortisol. What it is it's secreted by the adrenal glands, which add renal. They sit on your renal glands, and it's secreted, this cortisol, every time you're stressed out. And it pulsates through your whole body, and it causes things like your brain to shrink and other very bad things. So you really want to avoid having too much cortisol surging through your body. And how is that possible if someone is screaming in front of you? Does anyone have any suggestions? My point in asking that question is that there's this zone where sometimes there are no answers. Yeah, there we go. That's a good one. I don't hear anything. La 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 la. Right, but I think what we need to do as caregivers is certainly there are things that we can solve, and I'm all about being proactive, but what happens when you're falling from the sky at 120 miles an hour and there aren't answers? And I think both are important to acknowledge, and I'm up here just to acknowledge the part where you don't know the answers, and my point, more than anything else, is that it's okay. It's actually the same role that a sexuality educator takes, and when I encourage people to talk about sexual health in the community, I say you don't have to know the answers. The key is that you're just validating people as whole beings who have a right to be passion and have passion and be love in their life throughout their lifespan. So stress and intimacy. How many people have felt this way before? Raise your hands. Anyone? I saw this picture and I was like, this is hilarious. I felt that way. So what happens with stress and intimacy? Basically what happens is you can't do what's called neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, which is the capacity of the brain to create new neurons and to repair broken neural pathways. If you're stressed out, you can't, your brain isn't working that well. And stress is the worst thing. Like I said, that cortisol, which is secreting through your body, it's not good for the body. And a lot of the natural healing functions of the body, they can't occur if you're having cortisol surge through your body and your limbic brain is firing the fight, flight, freeze mode. So there at the very bottom of the slide, not bold, I have increased relationship stress impairs different capacities around sexual happiness. So stress affects all levels of whether or not you can be happy or not. So what we want to do is we want to do our best to minimize it. And then I'm going to go in a little bit about what happens for the person with dementia and then the caregiver around intimacy. So I have these on the handout. If you all want to pull out the handout, it says dementia and intimacy. It's in your folder. This is the first 7. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's under the partner with dementia. It's at the very top. And what you have is these are all from studies. These are the behaviors which occur related to emotional intimacy and what gets in the way of that. These 7 possibilities reduce the capacity of the couple to have intimacy. The caregiver the focus is survival on the present. And then the relationship is a significant alteration in the cohesion of marriage, particularly through the loss of relationship ritual. So that's what happens, is you get a loss of relationship ritual. So what are relationship rituals? A relationship ritual is if you were married for 59 years and every anniversary you got a dozen roses. And that's not happening anymore. Okay? Some people are nodding their head. That what the researchers found is that it was through the loss of, I can't even remember the name, relationship ritual, right? That's like such a science term. It's through the loss of that ritual that the intimacy between the couple is lost. So for those in the room, when we're talking about how we can grow a new intimacy, that means I have 5 minutes. For those who want to grow more intimacy in the relationship, what you want to do is you want to create new relationship rituals. So an example would be, let's say your loved one used to make coffee when you woke up in the morning, but they can't do it anymore. What you can do is set the coffee maker up before you go to bed, and then if they're capable, and then when they wake up in the morning, they can go and push the button, and then they have coffee ready for you. Right? It may sound kind of corny, and it may seem like more work for the caregiver, but the studies show that if you can create new relationship rituals, that it helps with the sense of intimacy between the couple. Basically, what happens with intimacy in the brain? In attuning to another being, we bring a feeling or empathy with another's feelings, as well as a kinetic and emotional sense of another. The listener defixates from his or her experience and lets go of the mind's thinking long enough to enter into another's experience, right? But what happens when someone can't do this? Right? This is really the question that I'm not necessarily going to have an answer for, but it's more just to think about. What happens when the person with dementia, their prefrontal cortex, that attuned communication, that skill set is just slowly going away. So you're losing that connection. How can there be intimacy when a care receiver can no longer do this? Right, basically what happens is the moment-to-moment experience of intimacy is a new normal. That's how I label it. What we do know is that people with dementia have the capacity to stay emotionally connected. It's probably one of the last capacities to leave. So you can continue to connect with your loved one. It's just not going to be the same type of emotional intimacy with that prefrontal cortex where you talk about the past and you talk about the future and you have meaning making and there's intuition and there's morality and there's higher thought. You know, there's all these complex functions. You're not going to have a type of intimacy that involves your prefrontal cortex, but it's important that you get that intimacy from somewhere else. That's my one point. My other point is you can continue to have intimacy with your loved ones, so I don't want you to think that you can't. You just have to adapt. And sometimes the new normal is more frustrating, and sometimes it's better than before. So I've talked with people, and oftentimes they've actually have a renewed sense of intimacy and happiness in the early stages of dementia. So it's not always actually worse. Sometimes the loved one can relax into their experience and open up emotionally in a way they haven't before through the disease process. So in terms of using your prefrontal cortex, one piece of advice I would give everyone in the room is to imagine that your situation is actually going to get easier as the disease progresses, not that it's going to get worse. So what you want to do is you want to reframe how you imagine and see your future unfolding before you. That was the best advice that a counselor gave me as I was caregiving my husband with a brain tumor. At first I was like, what are you talking about? And I realized I was having all this panic and I was imagining all these worst case scenarios. So use your prefrontal cortex in a positive way and imagine that in the future the situation is going to get easier. And it was true for me. A friend stepped in as a caregiver, hospice stepped in. My life did actually get a little bit easier as we progressed. There was a grace that came in and assisted me and a softness. So don't always think that it's going to get worse or harder. So my 2 tips are basically you want to acknowledge the loss and find new ways to get your connection needs met, and then you want to have self-intimacy. That's basically insight, and that's called intrapersonal resonance. That can be through meditation or yoga or mindfulness, anything. That's all forms of self-intimacy. That's what I'm calling it here. And just on the handout, since you all got it out, I wanted to correct one thing on it. At the bottom, there's an affirmation. It says under the caregiver, I have it in bold. There's this affirmation. It says, I forgive myself for things left undone. I actually wanted it to say, if you have a pen, the actual affirmation is, I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. And actually, I thought, why don't we all just say that together? Because it's such a great affirmation. So I'm going to repeat it one more time, then we'll all say it together. The affirmation is, I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. So we'll say it together now. Ready? I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. Great. So I'm at time. I work with a company called Aging Care Advocates. I'm a geriatric care manager. My table's over there, so if you have a question, you can talk with me afterwards. Thanks so much.